Welcome to the Startup Grind.
So, without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Scott up here, and we'll get the evening started. Scott,
Okay.
have a seat.
Yeah.
So, you guys can hear us fine, right? There's no. What's your name? No. Clay. What's your name? Hiram. Okay, I knew you. I just couldn't remember your name. Sorry. That's fine. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. Scott, welcome to you. Thank you for taking some time out of your evening. And
You're happy to be here.
Thanks
Round of applause for me. Okay.
Thanks for being here.
Since we don't have a fire, there's this nice wood table in
Yes.
front of us.
It could burn.
We have some alcohol still left. I think we should make it a bonfire that is in the middle, right?
It's definitely burnable. So.
By the way, I have to say, you look like a lovely crowd. You look uncomfortable to me. I see these empty, cushy couches and chairs.
Yes, she will come
and you're all in the folding chairs. It's your choice. It's fine. You're not sure if it's worthy of moving forward. Hopefully, by the time we get to Q&A, you'll feel inspired. Thank you, sir. Thank you, paving the way. Look at you. You're a trendsetter now.
Yes. And if you need more wine, feel free to get up and
See, for those of you in the marketing circles, that's a social proof and the first follower. That's what we have right there. Social proof first follower.
Okay. I'll tell the caterer we need more Malbec. Again, for the first time, this is really just a conversation about startups and et cetera. So, Scott, you were at Microsoft for almost 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was hearing you telling the story about when you got hired. You know, out of college. But what do you think you learned in those 10 years that kind of got you to where you are now? That helps you. I mean, other than having the Microsoft brand behind you, which doesn't hurt.
It depends who you're talking to.
That's true. That is true.
Helps or hurts.
Yeah.
My first job was on the Internet Explorer team, working on version 1. And so I had the good fortune, it was nothing that I did, I lucked out to be on a very entrepreneurial team at a very large company. And that's an unusually good set of circumstances, especially if you have a good manager, which I did. And so I had the opportunity to be at this big company, had a lot of money, it was still a young company, had a lot of money, especially for the young tech sector at the time, that realized that this team that was sort of a fledgling small team of like 15 people suddenly became really important. I got to see all the things that fell out of that. And I started off as a user researcher. So I was doing user research and design research, but then quickly, in less than a year, I switched to become a program manager, which is something between a product manager and a project manager. And I was very junior, but that experience of being on an entrepreneurial project and suddenly in a big field, after releasing 4 or 5 versions of that, I felt like I had experienced many of the different dimensions of what it is to make things.
Sure.
So I felt very fortunate. The second half of my career at Microsoft was more of the predictable, what you'd expect. I worked on more conservative groups. I didn't have as good managers to work for.
Sure.
And that helped accelerate me out of the orbit of the company.
So one of the things that I love about, I heard Scott talk about 2 years ago, I think it was just some random meetup, because it was probably not much different than this, honestly. And I just found it just an interesting point of view, but also entertaining, which normally you don't get to laugh at meetups. It's not usually a humorous thing. So that was one of the reasons why when a friend of mine said, hey, you should talk to Scott, I'm like, oh, shit, yeah, I should talk to Scott. He's awesome. So that's why Scott, so tell us, just give us the rundown, like, what do you do for a living, which I love.
Okay, so worked at Microsoft from 94 to 2003. Had a mixed career. First half was really interesting. Second half was more frustrating. I was 32 years old at that point. I decided that I did not want to spend my whole life in the same profession, in the same career, at the same company. So I decided I needed to quit, which was terrifying to me. It was terrifying for my wife. It was terrifying for my parents. I worked up the courage to do it. And the best thing I could think of as the next thing to try was to be a writer. I did not have a journalism degree or an English degree. I studied philosophy and computer science in college. For whatever reason, that was a thing in the back of my mind through my 20s. Someday I'll write a book, someday I'll write a book. And then I realized, well, if I don't quit and try to do something else now, I might never have the courage again. So I quit in 2003. I worked on a book about the London subway system. I have an interest in design and architecture. found a crazy friend who had a month off from work, went to London, slept on a friend's basement, wrote a book about the London subway system, couldn't find a publisher for it. But I realized that I loved the process of writing, that my fantasy idea of what a writer's life was like and my experience writing a draft that I couldn't find a publisher for validated this is something I like and love enough to continue to try. So I wrote a second book called Making Things Happen, which was basically about how to be a project manager in a software company. And that book did well. And that book did well enough that I got invited to speak at places and promote the book, and that gave me enough clout to write a second book called The Myths of Innovation, which is really about the misnomers that are very deeply rooted in our culture and even in our education system that are flawed about how progress happens. That book did well. I got started getting hired to speak at places. People would pay me to give lectures, and that validated.
How did you feel about that?
I felt great. I felt that I knew from my experience at Microsoft, where I was a manager, and I would hire people to come in sometimes to do training or teach things. I understood there is a business there. I had no reason to expect that I could make my own business there. But that felt great, and that validated it. And I've written 7 books now, and that's the primary way I make a living. I write books. I get royalties from that. If the book does really well, that'll be a large part of my income, but most books don't sell that well. The speaking income is generally the larger percentage of my income. That's a more lucrative business, but it's also speculative. And the way that I look at both these things, I know we're at a startup event. I look at every book I write as an entrepreneurial experience. It's a new book. I have to work with a publisher, preferably, or possibly. They are my venture capitalists. They are giving me money in investing in a product that I want to make. And I am the sort of the CEO of that, but I have a contract I sign that's binding. They're going to get profit from it. The dynamics and the parallels are very similar to me. Writing a book that's going to do well and starting a company. But anyway, that's my story. One minor detour. I took a job at WordPress at Automatic in 2010. Matt Mullenweg's the founder of the company. He knew some of my books, so I kind of knew him. They were changing the company from being a 50-person small-scale thing to being a larger company, and they wanted to bring in managers for the first time. They were a flat company, and he offered me a job as a team lead, which I had done. I told him I would do it if I could write a book about it. He was like, okay. He's a blogging company, so they're very open-minded about like writing and publishing, you know. So he said, okay. I'm like, okay. So I worked there for 2 years, and I wrote a book called The Year Without Pants. And that book is called that because they're a 100% remote company.
So there is no office.
There's no office. Actually, while I was working there, they purchased this enormously beautiful office on Hawthorne Street in San Francisco. They recently announced they're closing it because no one goes there. It's like a 20,000. There's 5 people go there every week, so there's 3,000 square foot per person who shows up. Anyway, so for most of my career, the last 12 years, I've written books, given lectures, except for this stint at WordPress where I managed a team again.
So what's very interesting is the perspective he brings is how things work in our environment. You know, when we're starting a company, some of the things that we may think is unique is absolutely not unique. It's totally it happens in almost every company, and that's some of the perspectives that Scott brings into this because he's written books about it, but also been in it, you know, from a standpoint of a leader. So Scott, tell us, or tell me, or tell us, you know, when you're starting, or let's say not even starting, when you're managing a group of human beings, what to you is the thing that is the key for that? What's the key to making them successful? What is it you say, hey, here's the top 2 things or 3 things?
Number 1 is trust, which is an easy word to say, and everyone talks about it, but most people don't trust each other in the world. Most people don't trust each other in their companies. I think trust is very rare. And when everyone talks about being in a high-performance culture, what that really means is people trust each other. And you only build that through having managers and leaders who offer you their trust. That trust seems like this thing that you just decide you want to have it and you get it, but it's making yourself vulnerable. That if, let's say, I told you that I had the draft of my next novel on my laptop here and it's unsecured and I need to go to the bathroom, and I say, can you watch my laptop for me? I'm saying I trust you, and that's how trust starts. But that's counterintuitive. Most people think of trust just as the earned. I'm not going to offer anything to you until you've proven you're trustworthy.
Yeah.
But if you're a leader or manager, the trust starts with you. Do people trust you? And that's going to, anyway, that's the first thing.
Yeah.
Is if I'm the manager of a team, especially if I'm a new manager, and this is part of my experience at WordPress, was there was already a group of people that worked together, and I kind of came in as this new manager. They have no reason to trust me at all, especially because for WordPress, which is an open source company, someone from Microsoft is like,
Dude,
what? Why are you even here? You know? So, and the way you earn trust then is very small things.
Yeah.
That you don't come in with a grand plan for how you're going to fix everything, because that implies that you know better, and you don't. You're the new manager. So you instead say, I need to observe. You tell your team, I'm new here. I just want, I'll do the minimum you need me to do to function. I'm going to observe. What are you good at? What is she good at? What problems do I see? What good? I don't know yet. So I can't change, I shouldn't touch anything yet.
You're going to break it.
I'm going to break. Well, I don't even know. I don't know what broken is or good is. And I think that is an easy way to earn trust, is to tell people who are afraid of you because you're the new new person in power, to say, I can't, there's not that much I can do yet.
Yeah.
A month from now, I may have suggestions. 2 months from now, I may have orders or something closer to orders. But right now, I don't. And I think that in your own work experiences, it's very rare for a manager to ever be that honest about how little they know or how incompetent they know they're going to be at the beginning. And that's a way to, again, it's like the laptop thing. You have to make yourself vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's the
in a
key.
way.
That's the key, is like being able or being willing to share that you don't know what the hell's going on.
Which sounds like something you should never say,
Yeah.
right? I can't imagine there's an MBA course in like how to confess your ignorance, like the 10 ways to say how stupid you are. It's like it's all this egocentric thing,
Yeah.
which I think is terribly flawed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you're in the who was I? That was, what was her name? Debbie. We were talking to Debbie. She was so kind of interested in like, what's it like to be a writer, right? But as Scott clearly pointed out, it's like it's actually no different than doing what we do as starting a company. It's just his product is a book and our product is a piece of software or a piece of hardware in my case. But so when you're starting, when you've got the idea, when you have idea like, okay, I have this idea I want to do. Like, what are the steps do you take to make sure it's even a good idea or a crappy idea? How do you know?
The first thing is you have to write it down. Like the problem with the whole notion of creativity is that people just don't write their ideas down. And when you write something down, you're forced to articulate it, even if it's just quickly, you're forced to articulate it in specific words. And an epiphany is it's a dopamine emotional experience. It's like an abstract thing. It's a great idea, and it feels great, and you think it's great because it feels great. But then once you try to write it down, and you start, wait a second, like there's no way to do that. Like that we have to invent 3 laws of physics to. So once you just by writing it down, you're now moving from this emotional experience, which could be completely divorced from reality, to I can define the idea in a sentence or a paragraph. I can put it down. And once you put it down, you can put it aside, and you can come back the next day, and that now your mind is not based in that emotional dopamine infused reality. You're now, oh right, oh yeah, and now there's nothing that's unique to writing about this. Any creative process, including starting a company or adding a feature to a product, is the same process of this emotional experience of what it feels like to have the idea, but then this other process of reviewing it later. So I actually feel like I've divorced myself from your question.
That's all right. No.
Yeah, I've wandered away from your question.
That's right. So when the emotional piece, I think, in a show of hands, like who when you came up with your idea that the circle cellular thing, like when you came up with the idea, was it emotional? Do you remember the emotional point of when it happened? Hiram, do you remember the emotional point?
Well, the first time I came up with what I thought was a good idea, I do. But after a while, I think I've kind of learned a little. So I come up with these ideas, and the dopamine rush lasts a shorter period of time. Because I realize that, wow, that sounds awesome, but okay, there are all these steps. And so when you talk about putting it down on paper, it makes a lot of sense to me. Because I came up with one recently that sounded brilliant, but when I think about it, I'm like, wow.
That's a lot harder
Yeah.
once you write it down, right? Yeah.
Yes. The other way to go is to talk to someone about it.
Yeah.
Because you enter an idea in your mind, you have all this context you don't realize that's required for the idea to even make sense. And then when you try to explain it to someone else, you slowly realize that there's all these layers of assumptions you've made, some which may be valid, but some which are probably completely insane. But you don't know that until you, so there's a whole, and as we discussed before about writing, I think a lot of, you asked me the question earlier about what did I learn from Microsoft. I feel like I learned in those first 5 years about how to make a good product. Every part of that, from the concept to developing a vision, to prototyping, to engineering, to quality assurance, how to make a product. And I look at books in a very similar way. It's very similar. Proof of concept, vision, proof of concept, minimum viable product, you write a draft, you get feedback on it, you iterate, and then at some point it becomes production, you're thinking about quality assurance, which is editing or copywriting or proofreading, and then it's all very similar to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that idea stage, I mean, let's assume that it's an idea. It's okay. You figured out at least a couple of people say, yeah, it's a pretty good idea.
Right.
You should take that to the next step, right?
Yeah.
So where is it that you find the pitfalls of that? Like getting from like 5 people said it's a good idea to getting it to at least, well, maybe it's not even a minimum viable product, but at least it's something you could show me or Matt or someone. Like, where are the steps there that you were like? Where are the holes that you're the?
There's this 4-letter word, which is just work. It sounds so stupid, but the idea doesn't require much work at all. A little bit to finesse it. Oh, I can write it down as a concept that someone might solve a problem, be interesting. But then, the best idea in the world could require 10 years of work to make a minimum viable product, but you don't know that yet.
Sure.
And because you're trying to probably do something that you don't think anyone has done before or done well, you're going to seek these unknown corners. But the unknown corners have this problem that they're unknown corners, so you don't know how long it's going to take.
Yeah.
And that's where our logical brains and our romanticism about creative thinking and innovation betrays us. That most of the stories we know about things being invented, they worked out well. It's survivorship bias. We are biologically, survivorship bias, familiar? Some of you are nodding your head, some of you are not moving at all. You guys are awake still. The survivorship bias is very important to understand, because what survivorship bias is, it's this, if someone, let's say that a cruise ship, it's a terrible thought, but let's say a ferry going across Puget Sound right now sinks, and 10 people survive. We will instantly assume that 10 people who survived, it's a kind of cognitive bias, there was something special that they did. We'll want to believe or want to hope there was something that they did. They all were on the left side of the boat, or they all had a burger for dinner, or they all had a beer before the boat sank. We want to believe there's a theory and a story as to why some people survived and some people didn't. And it turns out that in the reality of these situations, a lot of luck is involved, a lot of random chance, a lot of things that could not be predicted. But when you look at the history of startups, most of the stories we know well are successful stories, where they went into the unknown to make a new product, say Apple and the first personal computer, and it worked out well. That's why we know their name. That's why they're a billion-dollar company. It worked out well. We don't hear the stories of the 10 other people who were in the same basic neighborhood as Wozniak, who had similar ideas, and for reasons that if you were there at the time in 1976 or 77, and you looked at all the offerings, you would not have been able to guess which one was going to become popular. Your likely assumption at that moment would have been, none of these things are popular. These are all terrible. Like, maybe like 100 people want to buy these. So survivorship bias becomes the problem of, you start working on an idea, you think it's good, you're in the unknown, and if you don't see success quickly, you compare yourself to the Googles and the Microsofts and the, I don't know what.
All the successful ones.
Right, and that seems so obvious. It's so obvious that Uber should be this thing. It seems so obvious now. But before Uber, it was not obvious at all.
Yeah.
So I think work. You end up with, you're working on the unknown, you're like Magellan or Da Gama or Captain Cook. You're sailing into the unknown, you believe you have a theory as to what's going to work out well, and that is just the nature of entrepreneurial work, that you're dealing with a lot of unknowns. You could do a lot of things right and still fail.
Yeah. Okay, that's it.
How does one put themselves out as that nut job? Where you've got an innovative idea and thought, and you're passionate about it, and you're like, it takes a leap of faith to get out there and really start talking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, but this is one of these traps. You're totally right, but this is one of these paradoxical traps. So we mentioned before, so we all agreed that we have these rushes of ideas that are, there's an emotional component to it. And then some of those ideas are just crazy, and we have to vet them out. But the kind of people who are the most passionate advocates for ideas are kind of crazy. Like they're not really well adjusted. They really believe fanatically. Steve Jobs fits into this category, as do most CEOs of most founders, at least. They're not normal people. These are not average, well-adjusted people. They're not. And so there's a certain fanaticism that's required. But again, we have survivorship bias. Most of the people in these situations with good ideas and are intelligent who have that kind of fanaticism, most of them fail. You can't entirely predict which ones, but that's just the business that all of you are in or want to be in. It's also the business that I'm in. Like writing is a terribly failure-prone business.
There's more failures writing. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Most books that you know that you think of as successful, if you ask the author who wrote them about the time they put in relative to the income they got in return, it's like a bad job. There's other reasons they may do it, and they may feel it's a good trade-off. But for the most part, I make much less money as an author and a speaker than I would if I stayed at Microsoft or was in the tech sector as a team manager. Like it's not even close. So
the bias is Mike would much rather interview somebody that's been successful than somebody that's just failed miserably and just
complicated.
Stuck down in
just
beat up and
yeah.
Well, that's complicated though. I think that it depends what you're interviewing them for, but there's something dangerous about hiring someone who's never failed, especially if you're doing ambitious work. It doesn't have to be a startup. You could be, like I said, like I was on the Internet Explorer team at Microsoft, which at the time, entrepreneurial team, big company. We were an aggressive team. We're going to do stuff by design that no one had ever done before. I don't know. I'd want to hire someone for that had a low threshold for failure. I want someone ambitious, but in some context of what it's like to fail in their emotional experience. They're going to need to rely grit.
Yeah. Tenacity and all that stuff that comes along with it, right? Yeah. Where, Scott, in your, I guess in your journey that you've had thus far, where do you think is the scary part for entrepreneurs? Where do you think the scary time is? I don't know what you want to call that, the scary period, or where do you think is the most frightful place? Is it the first step off the cliff, or is it halfway down the falling? I mean, where do you think?
I mean,
for you,
it's all kind of scary. The whole thing is scary.
The whole thing's
but scary is interesting when you delve into the bioscience of what fear is. The body responds in a similar way to fear and excitement. That we think of like, why do we go on roller coasters? Or why do people like scary movies? That that response that you have, your heart rate goes up, adrenaline gets released, you're paying attention. Those are like, that could be the beginning of your Bono and you're getting on stage as U2, or it could be, like, so it depends on your personality profile. I think if you did something where you never felt afraid, for a lot of people, probably in this room, that's just not an interesting way to spend a lot of your time. Yeah. You should work at a bank and like do like, actuarial equations all day or something. That's a very secure state. Every day you know exactly what you're going to get. So I think that for this, that's why the fear thing, it's like now becomes like meta fear. That if you know you're doing something ambitious, high rates of failure, even if you're good, then there's sort of this meta fear of like, how many companies can I start and have them fail and still feel like I'm a good husband or a good father or a good, you know what I mean? Like, it becomes this meta question of like, what am I doing with my life? Which is now a whole different category of like fireside chat, right? Now it's this whole other level of, so I think it's all scary. And but it's scary and exciting at the same time. Yeah. Especially if you have a good team and you have a good idea and you've studied history, and then it's exciting.
Yeah, then it turns into excitement, right? Which is fear, like you say, fear and excitement. There's a lot of the same chemical things are in your body.
I
think
so.
Where do you? Because you were at a mosquito conference. I mean, he's been around, this guy. Like. Where are companies, that you're talking to and actually kind of helping them, do some innovation stuff? Where are some of those companies really doing a good job? Just give me a couple hints there, but then also tell me where their improvement is happening around innovation, around trying to create new products.
I don't know. I'm kind of a skeptic of the whole tech enterprise, and I use the word skeptic carefully. I'm not a cynic. I don't think that we should be, hauling water or like, living over a campfire. But I'm not a believer that technology can solve most of our problems or most of our important problems.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between having a great company that's doing great business and actual progress for society or for the world or for even like people's daily lives. Yeah. And some of that overlaps. I'm happy I have a phone in my pocket that does a million things, happy about that. I like Amazon, happy about that. But there's some limit of like, that's not going to solve most of my important problems in my life.
Yeah.
So when the word innovation to me means progress, and I'm a skeptic because I stumble along that. Like the fact that I can order 1 million things on Amazon, I'm like, if I can order 2 million things, is my life going to get any better? No. Anyway, so who do I think is doing a good job?
Yeah.
It's hard to say as an outsider. I get invited in places, and I get a very narrow experience of things. Hard not to look at Amazon as a great example. I mean, they're still doing a really good job. They hire really good people. I'm a user, and I'm a happy customer at what's now a mature company.
Yeah.
By now, in the history of companies like Amazon, they've kind of screwed a bunch of fundamental things up already. But their customer service is really good, and I have my complaints about the ethics of the company, but I think they've done a phenomenal job. And all the Google still is doing a phenomenal job too, I think. The usability of some of their products is terrible. Google Drive, I've been using for years. I can't imagine what that must have been an epiphany somebody had that they didn't vet with anybody. Because I can never find anything. It's real. I'm like, I can't. It's just terrible. And all the people who I use Google Drive with, we just send links all the time. I feel like it's 1995 or something.
I'm
it's like,
say that because I have the same thing. It's like, there's all this thing and you can't find anything.
right. Which gets back to a whole other dimension, like what is a good business?
Yeah.
That you can make a great business because you've picked on a good market and you've reached a good segment, that the actual customer experience can be terrible. And Microsoft benefited this from me for years, that they sold to the person at General Motors who bought the 100,000 desktops.
Yeah.
And they gave them a good price and all these tools to maintain it. But if you were a user of it, it was like not a good experience. So I look at Google, some of their products fall into that category. I'm impressed by these companies that have maintained. They're large companies now. Google is not an old company, but a mature company.
Mature.
Amazon's a mature company, 20 years old, or something like that. I'm really impressed. It's very unusual.
Yeah.
The trajectory for software companies, longevity at that scale is not good. So those are two good ones. Apple's become a little shakier. Apple has everyone I know who's worked there has not a great story to tell about the culture there.
Yeah.
So I'm more suspicious of them. But
What does it take, in your opinion? What's it take to start to continue to, innovate with new products? Just what's it take to create new products?
I think it's really hard. I have no experience being the CEO or an executive at a major company that already has billions of dollars of revenue, and I'm told to invent something that will replace that billions of dollars of revenue. That's an impossible equation.
Sure.
And I have my opinions for sure, but I have to caveat that with like, so few companies get to a point where they have $10 million of revenue or $8 million of revenue or revenue, right? And we're criticizing like $1 billion company for why they're not making a new product. It's like, what? Like, what do we, like, how do you, I can't. So it's a part of me has that answer of
Sure.
like, people always say, why does Microsoft keep making Office? Like, do you know,
It makes
look at
money.
that bottom line. Like, what are you, this is like bigger than like half the countries on the planet. They're like, what? You're telling me if you were the manager of that profit and loss, you would say, no, let's get a new team, 25-year-olds, and just replace it and put it out in the market.
Yes.
Like, no way. So I can't answer that without, but I think you have to have, the stories that I know, so part of the book, The Myths of Innovation, I wanted to read the actual histories of a lot of the stories that we take for granted. Toshiba was the company that pioneered the laptop. They didn't invent the concept, but they were the first major company to, they were already a successful company that invented this new product, or they succeeded in dominating this new product line.
Introducing it to the marketplace.
And so how did that happen? Well, there was sort of a Steve Jobs-ish sort of character of someone who had a unique kind of, not unique, that means one, an unusual personality type, very aggressive and very good at company politics, who he didn't sneak it out into market, but he basically worked around the board of directors to create this product line. and he put himself at risk for the success of this product that if it didn't work out, he had made so many political bets that if it failed, he probably would have been fired. And it takes that kind of gumption at a successful company, someone who's an executive, which means they're already in the power structure, but who is somehow an outsider or is ambitious or is a visionary and believes in these ideas largely and large enough, they're willing to bet their career on it. That's an unusual thing.
Yeah.
And that's often, if you read the histories of stories like that at existing companies that did well, there's usually someone like that who was in a senior position and took on the personal risk for their own reputation behind an idea and orchestrated it and made a big bet, and it worked out. Yeah. So the Toshiba laptop's a good example. They didn't want, why would we do this, and all the usual things that go on. And it's often those visionaries at companies that leave and start companies, though. Steve Wozniak was a similar guy at HP who was not quite as political and was like, I don't want to, why am I arguing with you about making this thing? Let's just quit and go do it. And which now we know is a very common story in the world we live in today. But in 1975 or whatever it was, that was not a common story.
Yeah. So in the process of you know, starting, iterating, getting the product somewhere. I mean, getting it to someone that will actually give you money for it. What things help get you there? And I'm saying, you've got the idea, it works, you got an MVP, maybe it's even a little more than MVP, but now you actually got to get somebody to give you a check. Like, they have to give you money for it. Not like say they're going to give you money, they have to give you money. So what things that you think, you know, you've seen in your experiences, what helps that step to get to there?
There's a profession called marketing, and it's a very important and very difficult one that most of us, because we have engineering backgrounds, really don't respect or fully understand. But that's the central story. We all know products that we hear about or buy even, that when we get them, we're like, this is terrible. But the marketing for it, the way it's sold and the promise that it makes and the way it's orchestrated is compelling enough that we hand over our money. And some of those products do well and earn the money back, even though they're not great products once you use them. But my answer to that is marketing. We were talking before about our parallel experiences starting companies and me with books of like, making the product is that's a skill set. You can learn it and master it maybe, but then there's this other piece of how do you convince people of the value? And that's a sales story. That's a marketing skill. That's a persuasion skill. And you could argue the history of progress of all ideas, not just in the tech sector, has a lot more to do with persuasion than it does with technical acumen or the brilliance of an idea. That go through the history of every major progression, printing press, telephone, Ethernet, laser printers, and the point at which, the 3D printer thing is still a little speculative. VR and jetpacks are all a little speculative, I think. But the transition point for how does it become mainstream is about persuasion. And someone who has that skill set, or is at least willing, as a leader, is willing to acknowledge the primacy of that and hire for it or pay for it. That I need someone other than me as a team manager or CEO or founder. I need someone on my staff that's good at persuading people. I'm not good at it, but it's important. So how do I cultivate that? How do I hire for that? And ideally, that's part of your plan from the beginning, but often you haven't figured out exactly what it is yet until you're further along, so you don't.
Yeah, I think that's one of those learning experiences that you learn probably on your second or third time, that you're like, crap, I got to figure out how to sell this thing. Now I've made this thing. Now how do I sell this thing? Because that's a whole different pieces of parts of the.
Has anyone here worked at Amazon or works at Amazon now? Since we're on the east side, I'm guessing no. But there's a cool little process that they do, that the people at WordPress Automatic also do, which is when they come up with a new idea for a feature, part of the process of deciding whether to fund that feature is that you have to write the press release for it. You have to say to the world or to your customer, what is this thing and what is it going to do for you? And that's a great way to vet an idea. Because as a creator, you're interested in an idea for all kinds of abstract reasons. But when you have to now describe it for the customer, this will make this isn't just some synthetic gel that's easy to replicate. No, it will actually reduce the amount of time your clothes need to be in the washer by 30%. Is that like, if you can articulate that, now you have a tool for persuasion and also a focusing index for how you design the thing or build the thing. And that may have to be modified over time. But anyway, it's a practice that Amazon's been doing forever, and I think it's fantastic because it forces you to think about the end result from the consumer's point of view. And if you do that right and you can deliver on it, then it's built in. The persuasion piece is built in already. The sales pitch is built in already.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's hard to do.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So for me as a writer, the exercise is, and some authors are smart enough to do this, is I have a great idea and I start writing a draft or maybe an outline. Part of that has to be, what's the back cover copy going to say? No one looks at the back covers anymore, so it's really, what's the paragraph on Amazon going to say? It's fine, but it's the same idea. You have 3 sentences. Why would anyone read more about this? And if you don't know that, that means you're in your own la-la land as the creator instead of thinking about, I have to deliver something of value.
Yeah, so that is a good takeaway, is being able to sell it before it exists.
It has to be a piece of your thinking. It can't be all of your thinking, because then you run down the path of, you're a salesman with you're a snake oil salesman.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of businesses we all see that are basically that. They're always promising stuff, and you use the thing, and it's like, this doesn't do that. And they say, oh, you have to get the upgraded version, the plus version.
Pro version.
Ah, right, the pro version.
Pro version, yeah.
Now, yes.
Freemium. The free one's free. The pro
Right.
one's got all the cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feel free. Hey, guys, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them anytime.
I want to hear more about innovation. So have you been invited into companies that actually produce like a physical product, like a hardware
Sure.
startup? And so how does that approach differ from software?
It's slow, and it's meticulous, because now you have atom expenses that with luxury. It's all bits. Bits are cheap. When you, I was invited a couple years ago to speak at a printer company. It's not a startup, but a printer company. And so I know a lot about design methods and creative thinking methods and all this stuff. But because it's a physical thing that has to be manufactured, there's other dimension to the design of the thing. You can't just make a great printer. You have to make a printer that can be built on an assembly line. So there's now this other dimension of constraints on engineering. And of course, the engineers they hire know those constraints and think that's part of the process. But that adds up the requirements of that be vetted before you can even launch anything. And also, it's not cheap to prototype. It's not nearly as cheap. So you can't do like a quick A/B test for a printer. There's a lot of methods that we take for granted, or this community takes for granted, for being all digital and all online. And you have higher fixed costs. That to retool that assembly line, if you realize you need to do a .1 release to a printer, is really expensive. Like a .1 release to a web app or mobile app is, it's the time it takes someone to upgrade the app. So you find that they're far more, and the ultimate, of course, is like cars. Automotive companies, their cycles are really long, and it's really expensive. So all their methods seem archaic to this community. That you have, like talking about 3-year plans, 4-year plans is like normal. For this,
What?
I don't know where I'm going to be living then. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, 3 years is a long time. Yeah, a really long time.
What about more our business as an example? I mean, public accounting. Old business kind of been done the same way for a long time. How do you, but it's also potentially ripe for disruption or innovation or wherever you are on that scale. How do you infuse in what is historically a pretty conservative business model this idea of innovation?
I think that the way you always start, and this is a universal way to start, is with what are the complaints that people have with what they're doing now. And people will always complain. We love to complain, especially if we feel that we're talking to someone who has the expertise or the power to solve a problem. So if this is where a different version of this question that I get asked a lot is, I push a lot for doing design research. You should know, you're trying to solve a problem for people, go watch them do the thing. Like you have an idea in your head for what people's experience is like, go watch them do it. Don't ask them, just watch, observe. Is this really what happens when at the washing machine? Is 30% of a shorter cycle, does that matter to anybody? Like what, they go away and it buzzes. Like does it matter if it's 10 minutes or 15? Anyway, to actually do research. So if you talk to your customers and you observe them, you find out what they complain about, what their problems are, that's your opportunity. I wouldn't call it innovation, I call it solving their problems. But we know every time you file your tax return with TurboTax, we know these are your top 5 complaints. If you hire us, we're guaranteed 3 of those complaints, we do it every day. We can get rid of them. The other 2, maybe if you like, we have to figure out and be customized solution for you. But that's the kind of dialogue that anyone would respond to. Oh, you can make my life better. You have a service that improves on what I'm doing. That's the language. Innovation, game changing, all that jargon, I don't think anybody really cares about. If you tell someone that something that bothers them or irritates them, you can solve it for them, even if it's for a price, that's the conversation that they will be engaged in. And I think that's one of the better uses of the word innovation, solving a problem for someone. And a fascinating thing about tax, whenever I think of tax, I think of TurboTax. So I use TurboTax. And it's okay. I know, though, that they are in this weird situation, which is not that uncommon if you study industries, where they are one of the largest lobbyists against tax reform. Because their product is the simplified tax form, right? So if and there's all these proposals for, like, the government has your W-2s, and they could generate a generic return for you. And you could decide to opt out into your specialized. They could tell you, they know. That would kill TurboTax's, 90% of the revenue would be gone. So TurboTax kind of plays both sides. They're pretending to be, we're for you. Their ads are all about, we're making it so much easier. While at the same time, they're hiring lobbyists to preserve how terrible the tax forms are. So it seems like, I don't, maybe, does TurboTax have any competitors really at all? I don't even look. I don't even know.
But sure they do.
H&R Block.
H&R Block, but that's
Yeah.
right, old school.
Plus, H&R Block will guarantee they will negotiate with the IRS if your tax return gets pulled, and TurboTax won't.
Yeah. What's interesting, though, H&R Block is a different kind of paradox, which is, since they hire actual accountants, they don't want to make a software. Like H&R, they're the perfect people to make a product that's
They
sort
do
of.
have a software.
Do they? Okay.
Yeah, but you don't get the guarantee when
Okay.
you use their software.
Okay.
Yeah, you
But
gotta
they're
be in
really
person.
cheap compared to.
Person.
I'd like you to expand a little bit on your comments about Apple.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what you were trying to say in between the lines there.
Honestly, I don't know. I've never worked there. I've spoken there, but that's nothing. I show up and I give a talk, and I don't. So I can't. I have no firsthand experience, like no privileged knowledge. I don't. But I guess.
What do you think about their products?
I mostly like them. I do think they're suffering from being an aging progressive, that they have so much invested in their product lines. The success of their recent releases has been not poor. They're still making, again, billions of dollars, but they're not. They're losing ground to Android. They're losing mind share, I think, to the next generation about who's doing interesting work.
What makes you say that they're losing about it? That 80% of the smartphones in the world
Yeah.
are Apple, and plus they got almost $300 billion in
Yeah.
the bank.
No, it's Android.
Android-
OS owns 85%.
Yeah, if you look at the world, Android actually owns more market share.
Well, the software. I'm talking about the phones.
I should say,
Yeah.
I don't really know enough to have a
I just thought you
well-informed
might know
opinion.
something.
No, I don't. I'm
I
telling you, I
would love to hear
don't.
about
No, I don't. I don't. My comment was more about what I know about their internal culture, and most of the things I've heard about their internal culture, and again, it's anecdotal. I've never worked there. I can't. Rubs me the wrong way. But every company has different cultures, and people have different kind of cultures that they thrive in or that they
You
don't.
gotta love Johnny Ive.
I think he's fantastic and does great work. I don't know that I'd want to work on his team or work with his team, which is an entirely who the hell cares what I think? Like they're not. They don't need
He's
clearly.
now taken the position of the Royal College of Design in London. He has taken
While he's still working at Apple.
well,
No.
he's still involved, but he's taken a leave of absence to
Yeah.
be in the Royal College of Design. He's English, and he loves design. I
Yeah.
think he's a great designer. He's done some beautiful products.
Sure.
Yeah.
No
I
doubt.
think everybody, that's sort of been the holy grail for a lot of equipment manufacturers to try to get to that stylish,
Yeah.
clean,
Yeah.
Johnny Ive design.
Which
And
comes, but Jonathan Ives was brawn, and there's always a history. That's part of the story of innovation is that there's always a history. That anything that you discover as being particularly revolutionary, once you scratch the surface of that a little bit, and Jonathan Ives will talk about it, you'll find that they had influences, and like the classic comparison is, so I grew up in the 70s, and you had these fantastic designs for stereo systems. And that's the same style design, these very smooth edges and stainless steel. That's the Braun style design, the Braun the company. And I forget the name now of the famous designer who worked at Braun and was influenced Jonathan Ives. But there's always a source of these things. Doesn't take anything away from Jonathan Ives.
The Germans are the best.
What's that?
The Germans are
The Germans
the
are the
best.
best, yeah.
They've always been the best.
Yeah.
You know.
Are you German?
Well, can
Are you German?
remember a 70s audio system that you thought was just white hot?
Marantz? That's the one that I had in my house. So it's the first stereo. My dad was a stereo guy, and I remember it had the analog, like meters,
needle, yeah.
and the dials were so smooth.
Yeah.
These things matter. I mean, in a way, these things matter. You know?
Of course they matter.
Yeah.
Tactile, the detail.
Yeah. And where do you think, where do you think design is going? I mean, Apple has had a huge influence on, a lot of electronic consumer electronics. Where do you think that's going? Do you have any feel for that? 'Cause I know you like design. I mean,
I do, but again, I'm a skeptic, okay? And again, a skeptic does not, I'm not going to trash on everything, but there's certain patterns that seem so strange once you think about them. And a lot of what goes on in design and in technology is this pendulum of must simplify. And the iPhone is a great example of that. Simplify. No fancy, just the basic core features. Make it really easy. 3 clicks to do everything. Simplify. And then little by little, once everyone catches on to simplification, now you get back into adding features. So you add more features. You add Siri. You add all the stuff on the iPhone now that every direction brings up a panel. And now you eventually the pendulum goes away from where you started, and now the race is to more features. You have more stuff. And then at some point, it'll go back the other way. And you see these patterns that are almost cyclical. And this is not unique to the software industry or designing things. You see these patterns in a lot of things of like, we need an organization to be centralized. A company needs to be centralized. We have one system, and you centralize things. And you benefit from that for a while, and then you start paying the price for being too centralized. It's too slow to get stuff done, and you diversify. Now every division. So you have these pendulums is never an answer. And I look at a lot of the design things about people thinking about progress, and it's kind of a pendulum. It's going back and forth. Like an example of that is like the obsession now with chat interfaces. So again, chat interface. Sure. This is the future, AI chat. Yeah. And I'm thinking like, I played Zork in like '75, like or Eliza. If you're any computer science students, Eliza, the cycle. I'm like, none of these things solve every problem. Like, there's no grand silver bullet for these things. So I tend to be skeptical about these large movements. Yeah. I think it shows a lack of understanding of how design works and how progress happens. That it's much simpler, smaller things that lead to progress, and a commitment to having a clear idea of who your customer is and what their problems are, and designing for that, rather than are you using virtual reality or a chat system. That's a very abstract technological view. Sure. That if all of us, instead of being here, if we were all in a VR room somewhere, somehow the conversation would be better. I'm like, no, the conversation would be better maybe if you and I were better at doing this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like the VR is a secondary tool for, anyway, now I'm rambling.
Matt?
Question. How do you avoid, and this is the whole idea of innovation, but Microsoft and maybe Apple is entering this era of old and slow. IBM was, and maybe they're with Watson and AI getting out of that. And then, Amazon seems to be beating the race with old and slow, but they're not as old as Microsoft or Apple.
No, not even close.
Right? So how do you beat the old and slow?
Well, I don't know. It depends what the goal is, I guess. I think old and slow is like fantastic in a way.
It's
like
profitable for a while.
Yeah, like IBM gets so much gets poo-pooed on all the time. They're an amazing company. They're 100 years old. They make billions. I still think the biggest software company in the world. They're not exclusively software, but their software business, I think, is still one of the top 5. So There's nothing wrong with old and slow. It really depends on what the goal is. If the goal is to have a successful company, I think eventually, if you can maintain a good business, old and slow is that's fine. If you want to,
Old and slow makes money because even Amazon, I mean AWS makes money, but
Right.
I mean Amazon reinvests.
yeah.
Reinvests.
Your question is totally fine. I'm perverting it into more of a philosophical question about what is the goal. That old and slow implies that speed always has value, and sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. Like I used the bank example. I made fun of banks before. I'm glad that banks are kind of an old and slow business. When I put my money in a bank, I don't want them trying out all kinds of crazy A/B tests with my money. I'm glad that they're old and slow.
Yeah.
If I have a safety deposit box, like don't mess with that. Like I'm giving it to you because I want you to use the old reliable method. If I go to a doctor and I sprain my ankle, I want the old reliable method. And I'm not saying that old is always the best. I'm saying there has to be some other thing. And where IBM comes up a lot, that no one thinks of IBM as cool. No one thinks of them as creating the next wave of whatever. So now it's about perception, that you want to participate or be a customer of a progressive company. Okay, well now I think, what does progressive mean? That means that you get attention because you're getting attention for being progressive. Does that mean that you're solving problems in a better way? Like, what does that mean? Amazon is they're going to study Amazon in business school for like 20 years because their profit and loss statement is weird. The stock price is $1,000. I don't know what their valuation is. It's got to be completely mad.
It is.
They may be the
Their
greatest
multiple's
example of like
40 to 1.
a company that never got out of this startup growth mode for 20 years. How do you? I'm sure there are people at Harvard Business School or Sloan Business School who are like, Amazon is like kind of not a pyramid scheme, but like there's something about what they're doing that is just unnatural in the history of business. Are they progressive? Yeah. Are they cool? Yeah. They're doing interesting stuff? Yeah. Is their product good? Yeah. But their profit statement versus their losses is weird. So not the model I'd want my bank to have.
Because you brought up the bank,
Yeah.
fintech, I asked Mike about this earlier, blockchain and the disruption of banks. Don't know if you're into this, following this at all.
I'm good at having opinions. I'll take little credibility, but I'm happy to give an opinion. Is there a question that you have about it?
Yeah.
How do you see blockchain disrupting traditional banks?
I don't think even the blockchain people know. I think it's such a speculative thing right now. And anything regarding financial markets is like incredibly speculative anyway. Like the stock market tomorrow is like just super speculative, and then it becomes speculation on top of the anticipated speculation of other people. It becomes this very weird mass psychological phenomenon of markets that I don't think really anybody knows about that. And I'm not something I study carefully.
Yeah. A couple more questions, guys? Go ahead.
I would like to hear more about your book on innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So are there some points that you didn't cover that were like stumbling blocks for innovation, or
The fundamental thing is the fundamental thesis, or well, one of the core theses of the book is that we love to believe and romanticize the idea that we are all fans of progress. And that's really not true. We're very conservative. The fact that we're all alive and that we are on genetic trees of people who lived long enough to reproduce means that we are all in the lineage of conservative people. There's a small percentage of people that really like to try crazy stuff out, and they mostly die. They mostly die. They provide a function. They're the space monkeys, to use like a Fight Club, NASA example. They're the space monkeys. And we do about, like, I think 10 to 15% of them in our population. Entrepreneurs probably fit a bunch of those. But most people really don't like risk much. And to seek out a new idea, even if you're sure that you're right, and you have evidence for it, is a risky thing to do. And most of our social structures and the way we become adults, we go to high school, we get grades, we're trying to fit in, we're trying to impress our parents, impress our teachers, then we go to get a job, we want to get promoted, so we get good reviews, we have to impress our bosses. Most of what we do is conventional. And most of the forces around us that bind us together as societies and tribes and families is conservative. And despite a VP or an executive at a company getting up in front of their staff and saying, we must innovate. When you get in a room, in a boardroom, and you say, there's $1 billion bottom line, I want to take that and invest it, like, no way. So there's a fallacy in just even talking about these topics. that it's far easier to talk about them than to do anything about them. And it's very common for people to say, I believe in progress in the future and experimenting and taking risks. And then if you get into a meeting with them, when you ask for resources to experiment or take a risk, you're told, no, it doesn't fit our goals. There's 1,000 reasons, rational reasons to reject it. And this doesn't fit our romantic view of how progress has happened. But the book documents, that's a big part of the book, is not burying people with history, but going through all these examples that we think we know, explaining, no, that's not quite what happened. That's not the reason why we got from A to B or B to C or C to D. It's not why we got the printing press. It's not why we got the internet. That, as much as we like to romanticize the idea, really what we want is someone else to have done all this work and experimented and failed and dealt with ostracization because they had radical ideas and then succeeded. We benefit from their survivorship bias. We go, oh, wow, maybe I should start a company, or maybe I should write a book. And then we sit down to do it, and we're like, this is way too hard. And then we want to read about the next story, about the next time someone else did it.
Yeah, exactly. So a question I literally ask every guest on here: what was your first job that you had that you received money from that wasn't from a relative?
Babysitting.
You were a babysitter. How old were you?
13, 14,
Who
early
was
teens.
your first client? Who was your first babysitter? Or who was your first? I don't even know what you call that. Is it babysittee?
No,
or
I don't know.
What is that?
I don't know how.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
Who was it?
I was doing junior innovation consulting. Is what I was doing. Right. I don't know how my sister knew them. It was some couple that had a young son, and she babysat for them, and she didn't want to do it anymore, so
You were the next one.
I got the next one. It's not. It's the word. Not. Is it nepotism if it's sibling?
Yeah.
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 So my first job was through sibling nepotism.
Yes.
Yeah.
But somebody else gave you a check.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask about the lessons you've gotten from marketing your books. Like you,
That's a good
wasn't
question.
like your core competency originally, but like how did you? What have you learned from that process? And
It's hard.
Marketing's hard. Well, one thing that one of the reasons I became a writer was to write books that I think have meaningful value. If I really wanted to just make as much money as I can and profit, I would have stayed being a manager in the software industry, which I loved. It was great. I like making stuff. I have no qualms about that. But that's not why I quit to write books. So none of my books are the 10 killer secrets to innovation trickery or the Jedi mind tricks to I don't generally like those books. I think most of those books don't live up. I mentioned before a bunch of times about books that are things that are marketed well, and you get the thing like this. Look at the cover. Like this is not. So those kinds of things. It's like a shallow kind of marketing, but that makes it easier to market because that plays on our wishful thinking that there's a solution like that for our biggest problems. And diet books, get-rich-quick books are always popular for the same reason. So I think philosophically, I've always had a challenge that I don't want to write those shallow kinds of books. So marketing for me has to be different. And I bet on the long-term value of my books, that a lot of books make a bestseller list and they sell most of their sales in like 3 months, and then they're gone, and they never sell again. And so I've tried to write books that have longevity. They're about topics that are perennial and evergreen. And the fact that books are 5 years old or 10 years old or hopefully 50 years old, I've hit the root of the tree of these questions and solutions. And so I have the long view on marketing books. If I publish a book, I'm okay with it maybe not doing well over the first 6 months, which would be death if I was writing a different kind of book. And I'm thinking that I can earn sales by the experience of people who buy the book and are happy with it. There's a word for this in marketing about like using your customers as your sales force. I don't know the terms, maybe some of you do, but I'm a believer in that. I want to write books as long as I can in my life, so every book to me is an invitation for the next book. I don't want people to buy a book and go, you know, this so disappointed me based on what the back cover said. I'm never going to buy a book from this guy again. I want the opposite. I want them to finish the book or read whatever part of it they decide to read these days, and go, you know, like I didn't finish it maybe, but like that was value. Like I got what I needed from it.
I'll read another one of his books.
Then they'll see so I'm thinking long term, and that's if you're a company founded on other people's money, you don't have those kind of timelines necessarily, but But the short answer is what I said to him. What's the problem? What problem do people have? What's the topic? What problem do they have? How have other books in the subject failed them? I have to study that, know the other books. How can I write a better book or a book that's different in a way that's valuable? And that's what I'm marketing to. It's like this, but that. You hear a lot of that in screenplay writing, but that's an easy way to convey your story.
Any other questions? One more question. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Wondering about when you were in the Bay Area, do you think the access to capital changed the psychology of a company when they went for the next round, or would it change?
I think it absolutely does. I think that you now have money coming from not your customers. The 37 Signals guys, you know, the Basecamp,
Yeah.
they're very big on this, and and of course they've done it, so they have more experience by far than me. But once you have money coming in, it's not from your customers. You have this weird set of responsibilities now because they have their expectations of you, but they're not your customer. That's weird. That's sort of like a mafia thing of like you have a pizza place and you don't make any money from your pizza. You make your money from some, and that's a terrible analogy, I guess, but but there's something sideways about it to me. And whenever I work with a publisher, it's written 7 books. I've self-published a couple of them. Whenever I work with a publisher, similar kind of thing. I have a deal with them, but they're not reading the book. My customer is out there. So if I were going to do a startup, I think I would work very hard to come up with a business and a product that did not depend on venture capital for that reason. And then if I do well enough with my product, and I'm at the point where I'm growing, my basis for that negotiation is very different. Because I have a market, I'm sustainable on my own, I can walk away from the table. I've never done it, I have 0 experience doing that, but if I did it, that makes way more sense to me.
That is the way to do it.
Currently in an extreme pendulum swing then, as far as pleasing capital versus pleasing customers.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I think that's a. I mean, from people, I would say it depends.
You know what though? I
Absolutely.
would think the smarter capital knows this problem, and they're going to try to invest in companies in a way that gives them some room, and encourage the team to focus more on what solving the customer problem than worrying about what the. That's what I think the smarter VCs would be doing, but I have no idea if they actually do that or not.
Yeah, I mean, the better VCs and actually the better angel investors will tell you that. I mean, they'll tell you, just focus on the customer, just focus on the customer, just focus on the customer. Now, 7 years later, there's probably going to be a different conversation.
7? I don't know. That's pretty good.
Yeah, 5 to 7 years later, there's.
Is that what you're getting?
Well, I mean, it's just,
they want to publish books, maybe we can like work something out.
I mean, that's the delta there, right? There's the communication changes, but especially early on, that's all it's. I mean, I've started several companies, and that's always the conversation. Focus on your customer. Get that right. The other stuff we'll figure out. And
Can I finish with the last 2 questions?
No, but you can finish with one though.
Pick the good one.
Just pick the best question.
Well, actually, they're both good. The first
Are you sure you're not German?
the first one is of the books that weren't self-published. What was the first run print? How many books?
Well, the first run has changed a lot because printing has become so cheap that. So my first 3 books were with a publisher called O'Reilly Media, which is a lot. O'Reilly. And they do a lot of tech books, but my books were not really tech books. One was on management, one was on the myths of innovation. My 3rd book with them was about public speaking. So the print runs, I don't know, they're probably 5,000 or 10,000, but their system was good enough. They're a tech sort of company, so they're very good at thinking about all this sort of inventory lines and whatnot. The books that did well, they could do another print run very quickly.
On demand.
It wasn't quite on demand because the scales they were doing were higher than that, but it was never an issue for them. And since their business was not as retail-centric, and I'm not John Grisham, or they're not going to print 100,000 copies of any of their books at all. They're not that kind of a publisher. But somewhere in that range, I think, for the first runs of those books.
And the question I can't ask you, but this is the second question. What do you think about the $70 billion valuation for Uber?
Valuations are like I said before, valuations are now valuations based on your valuation of everyone else's valuation. It's this abstracted thing. I think it's very strange. And unfortunately, our entire economic system is based on this kind of abstraction. So They're a young company. They've dominated their market. So compared to other valuations, it seems to make sense in a way. But when you step back and look at what's the actual real practical value of this, for all these companies, it's insane. I think it's completely insane.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
that's markets. I mean, that's.
Okay. Well, thanks, Scott, for being here. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you taking
Thanks
some
for having
evening
me.
out. Thank you guys for being here.
Yeah.